Hello, everybody. Bonsoir, bienvenue. Comment ça va? Ça va bien? Welcome everybody to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. Happy Cafe au Lait Day, where and when you are. I hope that you are sufficiently caffeinated and or libated. Welcome once again to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. Most fittingly, today's episode falls on National Public Science Day, fitting because Skeptical Inquirer Presents is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and of course, critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Lord, and I am delighted to be your host. I am a stand-up comedian and author. My official internet residence is veryfunnylady.com, but I summer on Instagram and winter on Twitter. You can see me in action on the stand-up comedy show Even More Funny Women of a Certain Age, right down Showtime. And I'm pleased to share, if I haven't already, that my dry bar comedy special now has over 1 million views. Everybody, thanks so much for making that happen. Now, two things. One, the Center for Inquiry's podcast, Point of Inquiry, is available wherever you get your podcasts. And two, if already, get yourself a subscription to Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And where can you do that? Well, of course, it's skepticalinquirer.org. Oh boy, now tonight we are in conversation with a very special guest. Illinois Congressman Sean Casten is here to tell us what the FERC is going on. You heard me, I said FERC. F-E-R-C. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Did you know that? I didn't. And let's be honest, neither did most of you. That's why our guest did a thing really cool last year called Hot FERC Summer to build awareness around the commission, its open seat, energy, climate change, and what all that has to do with where the country needs to go. He did this while invoking cross-generational musical references to Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas, Meg the Stallion, which is pretty bad, and not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. So the representative was inspired to, how should I say, get creative because he's cool like that and he's smart like that. He's true to this, not new to this. He is a scientist and a clean energy entrepreneur, a CEO, and now a member of Congress who has dedicated his life to fighting climate change. He's GA with 2 decades of experience as a business leader, reducing emissions while creating jobs, lowering energy costs, which is great, I now know as a homeowner, and spurring economic growth. He's working hard for the money, serving on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and is the vice chair of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets. He also serves as co-chair for the New Democratic Coalition Climate Change Task Force. So FERC it, everybody. Let's get started in here with our guest, Representative Sean Casten. Sean, welcome. Skeptical Inquirer Presents. Thank you so much for being here with us. I hope that wasn't all too long-winded, and I hope I tried to paraphrase and make sense of what you do. You're going to do a much better job at that than me. And so again, I thank you here. And I also want to remind everybody, since this is a conversation, please feel free to jump right in and ask, drop your questions in the Q&A box. But I'm going to get us started here. Sean, I want to ask you, well, several questions, because I am going to freely admit that I didn't know. I just didn't.
Nobody did.
But what I think was really smart and fun. So what was the idea behind, and I didn't ask, the hashtag Hot FERC Summer campaign?
Well, number one, thank you so much for having me here. I am just a huge fan of Center for Inquiry and Skeptical Inquirer. Delighted to be here, and it's kind of cool. So I would love to tell you that there was a master plan, but this started from sitting there saying, all right, the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, is the most important agency that you've never heard of if we're going to decarbonize our society. Because everything we're trying to do is how do we electrify loads? How do we get clean generation built? How do we get the transmission built? And if I've just put you to sleep, you've got the core of the problem, right? And so we're sitting there, at the start of the Congress saying, FERC's going to be important. The White House was not moving as fast as I'd hoped to confirm the open commission, which meant they couldn't do things. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I got a thing for hip hop and sort of grew up around all that. And I had a lot of really bad ideas for floor speeches. I'm still trying to convince my staff to do move Mitch, get out the way, but I'm not getting any support for that idea. And so, as we were sitting there,
I'm loving it. I'm loving that very much.
Like I said, I
got bitch, get out the way, dude. That earworm is in my head now.
Yeah. So we were sitting there with staff, and somehow it came up that we were talking about Hot Girl Summer, and I said, all right, I'm gonna make a deal with you. If you can make a speech on the floor to use the lyrics of Hot Girl Summer, and make it about FERC, I'll give it, and that'll be sort of our staff challenge. And as you know, that's not a real kid appropriate set of lyrics, right? So I thought we were done, and then my staff came back, said we got a speech, let's do it. And next thing you know, Laura Ingram's talking about it on Fox. We're on the Daily Show. I'm walking through the House office building, and this woman comes up to the elevator, says, "Our office loves what you're doing on FERC." And I said, "Oh, nice to hear that. Where do you work?" She says, "I work in the White House." and long story short, we got the White House prioritized getting that appointment approved. They went through, and FERC is now at full staff, and all because we made some dad jokes, right?
Well, it's funny, you call them dad jokes, but you got people's attention. You did what they call in the music industry or in comedy industry or entertainment. You got a hook. You entertained folks to sort of open their eyes and bring them in. So I wouldn't minimize that, because I think what you were able to accomplish is pretty cool. Like, the White House noticed what the job they're supposed to be doing, you made them notice. Like, what?
No, indeed.
I actually think that's pretty cool.
It was this weird thing where I think I'm a Democrat. On our side of the aisle, people liked it. Some of them didn't even understand it, but thought it was funny. And on the other side of the aisle, I think there were a number of people who thought, we're gonna put the white guy up trying to rap, and we're gonna embarrass him, and this is gonna be a good hook. And everyone was like, "Oh, that's actually really cool." And so it was sort of this weird zeitgeist thing where you're getting picked up on the Daily Show and Fox News the same night.
It's interesting, as I was, doing a little bit of research. I do try. There were folks that were talking about this that would never in a million years be talking about this on various podcasts. And the entry was in, this was cringeworthy, this was ever. But then they, even in their own commentary, went, yeah, but we're talking about it. So maybe, you did the right thing. And then what you've said, you were willing to, I don't think you looked silly, but maybe poke a little fun and make some references that people don't think and bring attention to something. And on another note, you never know, you might have encouraged some folks to talk to their grandkids and go, what does he mean? Who are these people?
I will tell you that when we did this, my wife was saying, like, what is this song? And then my teenage daughters are putting on Hot Girl Summer, on the Alexa, and that was a little uncomfortable.
I bet.
But I will tell you, one of the things that is so amusing, when you speak on the House floor, the camera, you see us stand there. More often than not, there's not a lot of people on the House floor, and sitting there and going out, and I've got my sign behind, and I look out and I see, a lot of old white dudes who don't know what I'm talking about, and I said, it's time to get FERCalicious here, or as you call it, the F to the E to the R to the C. And it was like blank stares on their faces.
I bet.
You're playing to a room that's not really the room that's sitting there, right? It's for the studio audience at home.
Yeah. No, I've been there, done that, sir, for sure. We have a very similar experience with that. I want to ask you, I mean, I do have other, questions that are to the point. Like, how do you see FERC? Well, let me go back. You said FERC is the most important, group that we've never heard of. Why is that? Why is it's not like we hear ERA and FCC and all these other sort of, government, and we don't know this. Why did, first of all, they should hire you, but why do we not know this?
Well, in some ways, it's a good thing because it's never really been politicized. The job of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, it was created in 1935 because we wanted to electrify the country. We said, if we're going to electrify the country, we got to figure out what the rules are. Where are we going to build the generation and the wires? Who's going to have the approval to build it? How are we going to set the rates and figure out who pays? If I build a generator in my state, but I ship the power to your state, who's responsible for paying for that and figuring out how this is going to go through the system, keeping the lights on? And it gets complicated. It was really important. We electrified the country with all those rules in a really, really fast time. It was, it's been extremely effective, but it's always been an independent agency. It's a 5-commissioner agency, and the commissioners rotate off through multiple presidents, and they do, what's on one hand is really boring humdrum stuff. We want to figure out how to incentivize behind the meter generation to participate in wholesale electric markets. I'm putting you to sleep again, I realize. But if you now sit there and say, okay, how are we going to get to zero CO2 really, really fast, right? Because the West is not only on fire in the summer anymore, it's on fire in the winter. Sea levels are rising. Just a report this week that Sarasota, Florida is going to be under 14 inches of water by 2050. That is within the lifetime of current mortgages in Sarasota, Florida. This stuff is crazy. We have got to get the CO2 down so quickly, so much faster than we appreciate it. And the answer to that is, everybody says, well, we got to build a whole lot of renewable generation. We've got to get that generation connected to load. We've got to take loads that are currently served with fossil fuel combustion, like your car, and turn it into things that can run on electricity, like all this clean energy we're going to bring forward. Well, that means we got to build a ton of generation and a lot of wires. And we're going to have a whole lot of fights about, does that wire go through your yard or my yard? And who's going to pay for that? And so we're back in the thick of this. And because it's been, not super politicized, it has an ability to make those decisions, I think, based on the science rather than the politics. We have a hard time doing that in Congress. But on the other hand, if it's not fully staffed and operational, those decisions don't get made. Really, really critical, really, really important. It's sort of like the referee in a football game, right? As long as you don't notice them, they're doing their job.
It's funny. I thought about this. I was in Paris, like I literally just got back. And what I noticed on the street there, they have a lot of electric cars. They have a lot of stands. They have a lot of things that are sort of already built. That I don't know if we have that to that degree here. I'm not saying we don't have it, but it seems like other countries are further along. Maybe a little faster than we are. Maybe that's due to size. Maybe that's due to how they are set up. I was listening to something you said where I believe it was when NAFTA was introduced, Mexico was able to do things a little bit quicker because they have more federal power to do those things more over states than we do here. We are very fond of our states' rights, and like you said, what wire goes where through whose backyard, and that we get down into those weeds and we're done.
Yeah, there's also, I think a part of the difference you see in Europe, and when I was in Glasgow at the COP26 conference recently, we were having this conversation with some of our European partners that, the US, France, Britain, we all came up with democracy at about the same time. It was John Locke and all these guys who came up with all these interesting theories, and we all rolled it out, and there's similar flavors. But in Europe, the population had already expanded across the continent. And so they had to develop rules of democracy simultaneously with saying, how are we going to equitably divide up these resources? Because the king's going to be gone. Who's going to decide, who owns the house, who owns the land, who farms it, who profits from this? And in the United States, because of, some of our foundational sins, the continent was kind of depopulated once we started. And so we crafted the rules of democracy in the context of resource abundance. That if we get too crowded in Philadelphia, well, just move to Ohio. If we get too crowded in Ohio, I'll give you the Homestead Act. You go out and settle that land. I'll incentivize you to develop the resources. And so we've got these sort of very different concepts that you see in Europe, where the Europeans say to us, "Why are you still fighting about the laws of physics? You understand we got finite resources and we need to use them more efficiently." And that just flows much more naturally out of a European concept of democracy than it does in the US, where, we still in the United States provide people with tax incentives to invest in energy efficiency that conserves energy, while at the same time giving you tax incentives to drill for oil that accelerate resource extraction. We're fighting with ourselves, right? And I think some of it is sort of that, the way we were founded and the geography we found ourselves in. And it's time for us to grow up, but man, we sure do have a lot of potential.
Wow, I love the way you say things so diplomatically. I won't even say politically. You're very diplomatic. Yes, growing up, we are. Yes, we can't afford to hang out all late at night and think we can get up early in the morning and go to work.
That's why ludicrous is my release.
Oh my goodness. I want to ask you, how do you see FERC and the new commissioner? Because you were successful. Your campaign worked. I give you credit for that. Well, how do you see them and the new commissioner highlighting the importance of climate change going forward? Because for some reason that's a debate here.
Well, it is a debate, but I would encourage everybody, be respectful, but treat somebody who debates the science of climate change with the same respect you give someone who debates the laws of gravity. Like, there are some things that we just don't have time to worry about here, right? We got to move forward. The stuff that FERC is sort of really top of the docket, if you will, for FERC. We have a very balkanized energy system. And so there are the ways that we regulate power flows and siting in Illinois, where I live, is very different from Iowa, because we're on two different grid management systems. And so as a result, there are really spotty rules that needs FERC to fix of if we have an excess of wind in Iowa, and in Chicago, we have a shortage of power, we'd like to build wires to connect those through, right? Let's get more cheap energy into Chicago. But the folks in the Chicago markets may be benefiting from having expensive power. And so there's these inter-system conflicts that only FERC can resolve. And so one of the things we've been really pushing, and I think they're going to take a look at, is these inter-regional transmission questions of how do we make sure that we do what's right on a holistic basis for the country, and not just look at sort of individual actors. The other really big thing that I think they can do, and some of that's, by the way, system governance, some of it's technical, but the other really big thing that we've been focused on is clean renewable energy is creating a problem that is the opposite of the problem that we've been talking about. Everybody's been saying, how are we possibly going to allocate all the pain for this conversion, because it's going to be expensive to make this shift, and we're getting away from, dirtier but cheaper sources. And it's all a bunch of hooey, because every clean generation technology is cheaper than the dirty stuff it displaces. And if you don't believe me, ask someone who's got a solar panel in their house how often they think about whether the power price is going to be low enough tomorrow for them to justify turning on their solar panel. It's always cheaper. That has created this weird problem that in wholesale power markets that FERC regulates, the price keeps falling because we keep building these generators that cost very little to operate. And so they'll run anytime. That in turn is steadily eroding the incentive to build new generation, right? Because when you generated a megawatt hour and it was worth $50, okay, can I make $50 every megawatt hour, and can I justify an investment? Well, now if that megawatt hour is only going to pay you $20, you can only justify 2/5 of the investment. And so there's this issue that is going to sail into FERC's lap very soon, and I've talked with some of the commissioners about it, that in their obligation to make sure that we maintain a robust and reliable grid, they are going to have to figure out how to, wait for it, put a price on carbon. right? Because they're going to have to figure out how to make sure that we incentivize that clean generation coming online.
Wow. So I, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how do you do that? Because that sounds like we would never use clean energy. Like we would never do it.
Well, we do it for all sorts of other things. So, there are, how do I, well, whatever, you got a science nerd audience, we can get into the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a power plant, that power plant provides a whole lot of things other than just electricity. I might be providing, quick starting service, because you need to have something on the grid that as soon as somebody turns a light on, I need to instantaneously be able to ramp up the power. I may be providing voltage stabilization services, because sometimes the voltage is out of phase with the current, and we provide those. Those things don't have really robust markets, but our regulators have realized this is a thing that provides value, the system needs it, and let's make sure that we come up with some other set of incentives and rules, or maybe even mandates, to build these things we need to keep the lights on. Well, one of the things that our grid also needs is for the world not to overheat, right? and by the way, we do create incentives for other sorts of pollution, right? So we make sure that, okay, this generator may be really good from a voltage stability perspective, but it's creating a bunch of acid rain forming compounds. And so we do those trade-offs. Well, now when we have generation that needs to come on the grid that is cleaner, it should be differentially incentivized from one that's dirtier. And FERC has the statutory authority to take care of that, but they have not so far acted on it. And if you wait until the power goes out because no one had an incentive to build things, it's going to be too late. You're actually already seeing these dynamics play out. If any of your listeners are from Ohio, you may be aware that you had a huge state scandal recently with the nuclear energy operators who said we're going to shut down, and it was a big corruption scandal. A bunch of state regulators got tied up in order to give massive taxpayer bailouts to the nuclear industry. But the issue that their nuclear industry was having was the same one I just described. They're sitting there with a very cheap marginal source of power, and they can't make enough money to continue to operate those assets based only on where power markets are. And so we had taxpayers bail them out instead of saying, let's fix the rate design to actually get the right incentive for this, oh, by the way, zero carbon power source, right? It gets complicated, but FERC's got the complexity to do this.
You mentioned Ohio, and I think what comes to mind is a question that's actually here in the comments from Jim Elder. Thank you, Jim. The Texas power failure issue last winter that happened, and in the rest of America was like, what? Texas isn't connected to anybody? Like, really? I mean, on the one hand, yay, so Texas, and on the other hand, what sense does that make? And then we saw that fail. How can that be fixed or adjusted? Will Texas actually eventually have to cooperate with neighboring states? Is that something on the line that you're talking about?
Well, it's exactly into this interregional issue. As you may know, Texas kind of has this thing about Texan independence. It's got it's got some issues down there. But little fun fact. So Texas got hit with this really bad weather event. It got really cold down there. They had ice storms, froze up a lot of the gas supply. A lot of the gas plants weren't weatherized, and that was why the grid went out. El Paso, which, as you may know, is in Texas, was subject to the same weather. Never had a hiccup. They ran through fine. The reason why is because the Texas power grid does not include El Paso. It's this ERCOT power grid that doesn't exactly follow the state borders. And so within the ERCOT system, which is what most of Texas is under, they have very few interconnects to the adjacent regions. So even though adjacent regions had excess of power that they could have provided and balanced the system, they couldn't get in. So every time somebody sits there saying, well, this was weather, you couldn't have foreseen it, this was this generation technology. No, El Paso was fine. Like same state, same climate. They just had access to pull excess power from Nevada and Arizona and other states that ERCOT didn't. And again, this is something that we can solve by truly creating a national electric grid. particularly as we get more heavily into renewables, because it's always windy somewhere, right? But to make sure that the wind gets from where the wind is to where the load is, you want to make sure that there's more robust interconnections on the system.
Jim followed up, I guess, with a question. Well, this is based on several things. He wants to know why don't places out west, for example, Phoenix, require all new homes to have solar panels? Is that a thing that can be done?
So there's, in theory, yes, Jim. Talk to your state regulator and encourage them to pass a bill, right? Talk to your zoning codes officials. One could certainly do it. You just got to go get the votes.
That's all.
Yes, exactly. There's a complex interplay of both state and federal rules. So you could mandate that they do this in Arizona, but the federal government couldn't necessarily mandate that they do it in Arizona. We can get very boring here, but the FERC jurisdiction is over interstate flows of power, which means that once you get into what you do at a retail level in your home that will change your retail purchases, those are subject to state utility commissions, and so it's a different set of conversations. But it's a completely fair question, and it's what some countries have done this very effectively. There's a really interesting history in Denmark after the second OPEC price shock, but before all the North Sea oil discoveries were done. Denmark actually very aggressively moved with exactly those kinds of mandates. So they said things like, if you're going to build a new housing development, you've got to put centralized cogeneration in place in a district heating loop, use the waste heat off the power plant. And they saw this surge of much more efficient generation that came in Denmark in response to some top-down mandates. Within the US legal structure and our federalism, you couldn't do the exact same thing in the United States, but technically it works. And we've got good case studies that shows how effective that's been.
It's so frustrating to hear examples of, hey, this country did this and this country did this, and well, why can't we do that here? Yeah, we got rules.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. That at the time, I guess, made sense. But yeah. Now you come to this. You have a very rich background, as a clean energy CEO, and that sort of put you in the place to recognize the importance of FERC. And well, did you always know that you wanted to come to this path, that from an energy CEO to congressperson? Was that always the plan?
Not remotely. So March 2017, one of my best friends said to me, you should run for Congress. And my exact words was, you're an idiot. And now here, that was, by 2018, I was a member of Congress. So no, it wasn't the cards. I basically have always been, I feel like when my life is over, I want to be able to say that I made a meaningful difference to sort of change the trajectory of climate change and leave a better planet. And I got into science and doing basic research in cellulosic biofuels because I thought this was a science problem. I moved to the business world because it felt like a deployment problem. And when we'd sold our company, I just sort of had this gradually dawning realization that I'd convinced myself it wasn't a science problem. I'd proven that we could deploy these and make money with proven technology, lowering CO2, saving people money. And on so many different cases, I was blocked by laws from going forward. And and in some ways it was sort of encouraging, because you sit there and say, I don't know how to change the laws of thermodynamics. I don't know how to change the laws of economics, but you can change the laws of the United States. So
theoretically,
so let's go and and see if we can play a role in that vein. And that's how I ended up here. But it wasn't because I had a quest to be in politics, but because it felt like the right tool for the problem at the point I was at in my life.
Wow, I love that path though. That makes complete and total sense. I was listening to an interview that you did, and this sort of plays into a question that I want to ask about that. That you mentioned that you weren't meeting a lot of folks like you that came into Congress with that desire, to affect or to make changes about climate change and energy. But now that you're there, have you been able to sort of maybe win over hearts and minds of your colleagues? Because it's collectively that work gets done there. So has your presence there made a difference, do you feel?
Well, I sure hope so. But, if I'm candid, CO2 is going up. Like the work isn't done yet, right? And we still are, struggling to pass, Build Back Better and these climate changes we need. So I certainly, I want to tell myself that I'm making a difference, but there's miles to go before I sleep, as the poem says. I think what I'm hopeful about myself. I had this really interesting conversation with a guy in the Obama White House when I was first running. And he said that he was watching myself and Mike Levin out in California, because he said, you're the first two people who are campaigning expressly on climate change and have a path to win. And he said that they had come to a conclusion, the Obama White House, that a part of the reason it took us so long to get the ACA done and the healthcare reforms is that the Democrats supported universal healthcare, the Republicans didn't. And as a result, there was no differentiation among Democrats, because all you had to do was say, I love puppies, they hate puppies. And no one distinguished between a Rottweiler and a Chow, right? And he said that they felt like climate was going to become a meaningful thing once you proved that you could run and win on climate, because then within our party, people were going to have to differentiate themselves. And let's have the more sophisticated conversation we need to have. And it's fun because I now serve with Mike. He and I are on the climate committee together. We were in Glasgow together. We were in Madrid. And, there are plenty of people in Congress who are 10 times smarter than me on a ton of other issues. Mike and I have found ourselves in this lane where people say, okay, on climate issues, you two seem to know your stuff. So let's, what do you think about this piece of legislation? And it would be, if you were on the bill, it would help get other people on it. And so you become that sort of like that, I don't want to say sector expert, but sort of the sector leader within Congress, which is, does start to move the hearts and minds a little bit.
Awesome. I mean, I wouldn't underplay the fact that you being there helps elevate the conversation, as you said.
That's the hope.
Yeah, no, well, the success, I would think.
Yeah. And sometimes makes it rhyme.
Duncan Hughes has a comment, and I apologize in advance because I am not wearing my glasses, and this type has gotten smaller and smaller as I've been online. He says, is FERC the agency to steer available funds away from carbon capture demonstration projects to investments in clean generation sources? Like, for example, rather than paying for a cleanup, pay to avoid the greenhouse gases initially?
Probably not directly. A lot of the decisions about what gets permitted will be subject to, EPA. The incentives are going to be subject to the tax code and Ways and Means Committee. FERC can play a role, but Duncan's question does go to the heart of a more substantive issue, which is that we don't. One of the things that scares me is we do not have a single agency responsible for energy policy in the country. And it makes it very hard. Duncan's question highlights a bigger problem. If you really said my number one issue is healthcare, where should I be? The answer is you should probably be Secretary of Health and Human Services, because that's where we do health policy. If you said it's agriculture, where should I be? Probably should be Secretary of Agriculture. Education, Secretary of Education. If your number one issue is energy, should you be at Department of Energy? Well, that depends, because they're mostly doing nuclear and some R&D, but they don't have any authority over electricity rates and transmissions. So maybe you should be at FERC. Well, you could be at FERC, except that the states do all the local stuff, like we were talking about in Arizona.
Yeah.
Well, what about Duncan's question? Well, some of that gets done at EPA, right? And so I think we would actually benefit from having, a national office of energy policy that sat over these agencies and said, let's just be coherent and row in the same direction, right? Because if we know where we want to go, let's set up a desk where the buck stops and move forward from there. But it does become the fact that we don't have that we we have no central clearinghouse for our energy policy gets done. Means that questions like Duncan get into a lot of long, well, yes, no, maybe, sort of, but no one has that authority. So maybe that'll be my next, I don't know, hot
Yeah,
Office of Energy Policy Summer.
because that seems like a glaring blind spot and maybe even an issue of national security, on
Yeah.
some level.
Well, I mean, the analog I'd put it is our energy policy is a lot like our intelligence policy was before 9/11. Remember all those conversations where we said, geez, the FBI isn't talking to ATF, isn't talking to
Yes.
NSA, isn't talking to CIA. So we created a Department of National Intelligence. It would be nice not to have a 9/11 type event to create that, but we are awfully disjointed on it.
Yeah, nothing like a good crisis to motivate humans. If we only did things before then. Charles, and I'm gonna, your last name, sir, is giving me pause. But Charles said the Navajo Nation has closed the coal-fired generating plant, but there are long lines across the reservation. Are there efforts to build solar arrays tied to the grid and to provide employment for tribal members who once worked on coal?
So it is a fantastic question. And my good friend, Xochitl Torres Small, who came in with me, who represented where that Navajo generating station was, she came in with me in 2018 and then lost in the wave last cycle. And I think is now working at Department of Interior. But we had a lot of conversations about this with her, but it's more of a national conversation. A coal plant, for all its environmental sins, employs a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. And not just at the plant, but upstream at the mine, on the railroad line that are hauling it out. If you put a big solar array on your house, you don't hire an operator, you don't hire a sun miner, you don't hire someone to bring the sun on the rail cars. And the good news about that is it is a massive increase in labor productivity. If we're creating more wealth with less labor, that's the only way long-term that you grow the economy, right? There's, automation was a good thing. Industrialization was a good thing. It helped give us the standard of living we want. We don't have to go out and, churn butter anymore. But on the other hand, I think we need to be much more honest about the challenges that creates, because the rate of transition that we have to go through is going to be extremely dislocating for a lot of communities that have depended on those jobs. And if you say to those people at that mine, well, good news, you can go back to community college and learn how to manufacture electric vehicles or learn how to do thin film deposition on a solar panel. That's pretty offensive, right? And I think if we can recognize that we are creating tremendous amounts of wealth in this transition, because that solar panel that we build out is going to provide something that's just as useful, that electricity, but with a lot less dollars, which means we got more dollars left in our pockets. But I think we have to be very intentional about how we share those dollars through the system and don't leave behind the folks who got us to the point we are right now.
Yes, I'm sorry. I hear your answer and I'm sort of lost in how many people historically have been left behind whenever we have these big changes. And it's aspirational, hopeful that we can do better.
Yeah. The heck of it is, if you travel around the coal mining intensive parts of this country, they all know this history at a gut level, because so many of them lost their jobs when we mechanized coal mining, right? So we kept mining coal, but nobody looked out for the miners. People looked out for the mine owners, but not the miners themselves. And so we massively slashed the amount of labor that went into a ton of coal. In the course of doing that, we lowered the cost of a ton of coal, and we've transferred all of that benefit to the consumers who bought the coal and the owners of the mine. And we didn't give anything to the miners, right? And so you've got those communities who have been through that transition. They understand this transition's coming. They're realists about it. But they also have a lot of hard lessons from personal experience that says, when these transitions come, I know you don't look out for me, because you never have.
Mm.
And that's where I think we have to be very intentional about it. And by the way, the Build Back Better bill that we're trying to get through has huge money specifically for that purpose. We are very much
Right.
trying to be intentional about it. And it's frustrating that some of the biggest opponents of that bill are the people who sell themselves as looking out for the interests of those miners.
Folks who shall not be named.
Voldemort.
Yes, Voldemort, indeed. A gentleman here named Barry Carr, that sounds familiar.
Vaguely.
Vaguely. Barry says, in your experience, do you still see a large percentage of House members across the aisle who are climate change deniers, or is that changing? Or maybe more diplomatically, are more people in the House more accepting of the need to take action?
So there's a tremendous sadness to that answer.
Oh no.
I've got some close friends, and I'm not going to name them because they're friends across the aisle, who really would like their party to be more out front on this.
Okay.
But they're also keenly aware that really since Gingrich, their party has been completely hostile to climate change. And I say since Gingrich because you know that we actually have a global treaty that the US led to cap and trade greenhouse gases that has worked and was led by a Republican administration. It's the Montreal Protocol on chlorofluorocarbons, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. It was done when we were concerned about the ozone hole. It was led by initially by the Reagan White House and then put into place by the Bush White House. And that was supposed to be the model. That was what was really the template for the Kyoto Accords. And when Clinton came in and said, let's adopt this model to Kyoto, Gingrich said, well, if Clinton's for it, we're going to be against it. And, led us down this sort of rabbit hole of, the fetishization of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of that is that for 30 years, if you were a Republican in the House or in the Senate who really cared about climate change, you weren't getting briefed on it. You didn't have witnesses. Your talking points that you got from leadership is, when they say climate, tell them the science is unsettled. Tell them it used to be, they used to say it was going to be colder, whatever nonsense they're spewing. And as one of my colleagues across the aisle said to me, he said, I just need the space to prove that you can win an election by being pro-climate. And if we can do that for a couple cycles, then we can come along. But he said it's hard because if you call us out for not understanding things, we're going to revert into our shells, because nothing scares a member of Congress like being asked a question that you have no idea what the answer is to, and you're going to look dumb with the TV camera on, right? And so in the conversations I've had with them, I've said, I'm delighted that you finally want to go to school, but we're sitting here with a PhD level problem, and we're not going to solve it with first graders, right? And so yes, there's some crazy deniers over there too, but I think there are more of them who are aware they've been on the wrong side of this and don't see a way to get right.
Mm. Oh my gosh, I think this audience in particular understands that answer, and thank you very much for that. One of my favorite guests, and I can't believe this, I'm blanking on her name, but we had a whole conversation about how once you've made a decision and you're on one side of an issue, it's very difficult as a human being, this is a human issue, to take in more information and change your mind. And even if you do it within yourself, to admit that publicly, we're not big or very forgiving on that, and you almost have to double down. Because that's how the human brain works sometimes, and it's working against the PhD level issue. As you say. All right, here's a question that I hope's an easy one, because what my goal here is, I'm not a gotcha person here. I never want to put someone on the spot and ask them a question and they go, oh, I don't know, unless the answer is I don't know, and there's no shame of that. Dirk Ewema, I think that's how you say your name, Dirk. Will the solar tax credit be renewed after 2023?
Oh, goodness, I hope so. And I wish we didn't have to have this conversation. Um,
Uh-oh.
no, I mean, we've done this really weird set of policy choices through the years that we've provided incentives for paths and never explicitly said what the goal was. So we have a
Huh.
tax credit for solar, we have a different kind of tax credit for wind, we have a different kind of tax credit for geothermal. Rather than just saying how much carbon are you reducing, let's reward you for reducing the carbon, right? Or what's the other value that you're creating? And so we've got this sort of very sort of herky-jerky structure in our capital markets where what's best for society is not necessarily the thing that will give you the best return on capital because of the way that we've done these differentially path-based incentives. And the reason why I say I hope we get it done, I wish we didn't have to ask it, is with this disjointed system, every time those tax credits are about to run out, we all find ourselves saying, we have to do the extenders. We have to do the extenders. Please, we all go to Pelosi. Let's get an extender package done so that developers don't fall apart. And then we get the extenders done. And then we all do a press conference and say, I care so much about the climate because I got these tax extenders done. And it's such a small thing. It's like, I don't even know what the analogy, like I really care about nutrition, and that's why I gave you this Oreo cookie. Like it's so trivial relative to
Okay.
the need, and and yes, we shouldn't give businesses uncertainty about whether these tax credits are going to be renewed, but ultimately it's not the right way to do it. We should go out there and say, what is the goal that we want? We want a reliable energy system. We want a clean energy system. We want an affordable energy system. Let's define that and get the heck out of the way. The analogy I like to use is when we wanted to settle the West, we said, all right, if you get out there, we'll set up the Homestead Act. You get out, you develop a piece of land, you improve it, and then you can take title of the land. Our energy policy is more like saying, if you buy 4 Palominos and you hitch them to a Conestoga brand wagon, and you go on Route 66, I will give you a tax credit for those particular ways to get it right. It's very path based instead of saying what's the thing that we really want. So yeah, long-winded way of saying yeah, but I'm kind of meh on that as a policy long term.
Understood. Thomas Casten says that climate deniers have moved, now admit human actions are causing global warming, but go on to state that we cannot afford to reduce emissions. Is this a real issue?
Remember, it wasn't that long ago that it was a big deal if we had $1 billion weather event, right?
Yes.
Hurricane Andrew, I think, was $1 billion, weather disaster. The insured losses from climate change in the United States last year was $160 billion. 1 year, one country, and that's just the insured losses. We lost a lot more than that.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we subsidize the fossil fuel industry in this country, according to the International Monetary Fund, by $650 billion every year. So before we ever get to whether or not we can save money in this transition by deploying cleaner generation that's going to cost us less, wouldn't it be nice if we weren't spending $160 billion plus $650 billion every year on doing the wrong things? I've told some of my colleagues across the aisle, I'm all for let's not pick winners and losers, but you all seem to be big on picking losers. If you got to pick, at least pick the winners. So we've got to make the transition. Now, having said all of that, I come back to what I said about the coal. This is not going to be a painless transition economically, because I can stipulate that it will generate way more wealth than it destroys, but the wealth is going to be concentrated among certain populations in certain geographies, and the wealth destruction is going to be concentrated elsewhere. Illinois, where I live, is sitting pretty. We got a lot of wind, we got a lot of solar, we've got a proper regulatory environment. We're not at risk of coastal flooding, we're not at risk of wildfires. There's other parts of the country that are, West Virginia is going to be in a tough way. It's a beautiful state, but geographically, geologically, it's a hard place to all those hills and hollers make it hard to build, roads and highways, much less Silicon Valley. And so as that wealth transfers, how do we make sure that some of those pains, which are, maybe locally economic, but local economic pains become global political pains pretty quick, right? I mean, it's like the Dust Bowl, when all the Okies had to move to California.
And perhaps I'm misunderstanding the issue, but is it, when thinking about how to solve that or get ahead of that, knowing that that's going to happen, knowing that there's going to be this huge wealth transfer, maybe not all the money just going to wealth? Are we talking about a universal basic income? Are we talking about setting it up so that people aren't just falling off a cliff and then we rescue them? I don't know. I'm so just thinking out loud right now.
No, I think some of this is sort of, they're good philosophical questions to have because there's no right answer. Somebody told me recently that in a utopia, the robots let you only work half a day, and in a dystopia, the robots fire half of you, right? And so as we make these investments that make us more productive, that free us up from the drudgery of doing things that we've historically had to do, we can tell the story we like to tell ourselves that we'll create more jobs than we destroy, and people with this free time will invent whole new industries, and we'll be right because it's always been true. Except that the people who create those new industries and benefit from those new industries, more often than not, are not the people who lost out in the transition.
Right.
When the steam shovel was a great development, but the end of John Henry's life kind of sucked. Right?
I think William Baker is asking my question better than I could. He asks, why can't we get a climate fee and dividend passed where the dividend goes back to people?
So I got to be careful how I say this because I love the spirit of this, and I really don't. And I really don't like the policy.
Okay.
If we're going to build out clean energy, which we have to do if we're going to decarbonize, we have to give markets the incentive to build that clean energy. That's why I was saying that FERC needs to figure out how to change the incentive so that somebody has the incentive to build a solar panel, to build a wind turbine, to build all that stuff out. If our goal, on the other hand, is simply to create pain for the producers of dirty energy, then we can raise their rates, we can make it more expensive for them to operate. But the question becomes, does a tax on your competitor actually change your incentive to invest? When Wells Fargo got slapped with $3 billion worth of fines over the last couple of years, it didn't change the interest rate I earned on my Schwab account, right? And so the idea of this, like, let's just do a carbon tax, is making a lot of assumptions around, will the people who are producing that CO2 emissions pass that cost along to their customers, or will their investors absorb that cost? And the answer to that question goes to whether or not the solar guy is going to build a panel. Because if he passes it along to his customers, the solar panel has a more attractive product. If he doesn't pass it along to his customers, then he's just reduced his incentive to build that dirty generator, but the solar panel didn't get any incentive there, right? And there's a lot of talk about, well, let's do a tax and then let's create a dividend because politically this will get wealth back to people. And if you do that fee and dividend structure, maybe it can politically pass. But you're now saying, I'm going to put a tax on pollution, and rather than use the proceeds of that tax to reduce CO2, I'm going to use this to buy votes, and I'm going to give everybody money back. And so if we don't connect those things up in a very market-oriented way, where there is a carrot and a stick that are exactly balancing each other, we're not going to reduce the CO2, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether the law passes, it matters whether the law reduces CO2. Right? And and I think the shorter answer to the question is, why is it so hard? Well, the way I would reframe the question is, why is it politically so hard to create a balanced carrot and stick, right? And create the wealth. And the answer to that is that there's no one who really comes to Congress and advocates for economic efficiency. Everybody advocates for their own interest, but nobody comes to Congress and says, I wish the market that I operate in was more competitive. Right?
Yeah.
And so you end up having very loud voices saying, I need to protect the industry that I'm in. Very loud voices saying, you need to allow me to keep doing what I'm doing. But there's no voice that says, hi, I'm the entrepreneur who hasn't had the great idea yet, but I would have that idea if you change the incentive structure, and then I would participate in this market. By definition, they're not at the table, right? I like to say that losers in Washington always cry a lot louder than the winners cheer. And so really pushing for market efficiency is a lonely spot, but we got to push for it, because the primary reason we're not lowering CO2 faster is because energy markets are so bloody inefficient.
Wow, which goes back to your call for having a national agency that handles all of this, as opposed to this piecemeal mishmash that we've got going on here. We have several questions here, but I know we're running close to time. I want to go back a little bit to your hashtag Hot FERC Summer, if I could, just for the symmetry of it all. And you almost answered this question, I guess, in the beginning. Like, what I want to ask, what made you make pop culture references for your House floor remarks? I know that you said that you sort of challenged your staff to come up with something, but to challenge them and for them to come up with something is one thing. For you to actually say, yes, I'm going to do this is another. That could have been a nice little ha 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 in the office, and then you walk away from it. What made you sort of go, yeah, I'm gonna do this?
Like, if you get a speech from your staff that says you get to be the first person in the history of our union, going back to Thomas Jefferson, to stand on the House floor and drop Meghan the Stallion lyrics, and you turn down that opportunity, shame on you.
Yes.
This is the chance to make history. Like, you got to embrace that moment.
I hear you.
I say that only half seriously, only half jokingly. Like, you spend a lot of time in this line of work trying to convince people to do things, right? And you spend forever reworking a phrase and trying to see what works. And you do get some intuition that sometimes, you'll see something and say, what, holy smokes, like, this is going to work. And that was why.
Wow, I love it. If to tie it in, if you've seen Hamilton, you did not want to miss your shot.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
Well, now that FERC is staffed fully with a Democratic majority, thank you. What do you want to see out of the Regulatory Commission in 30 seconds or less? I'm kidding.
I would love to see him take on the issues of governance of these regional transmission organizations. These issues that it's really a local governance, that the incentives are wrong within the individual groups that keep them from building that wire from Iowa to Chicago, in the example that I said. And I think they could fix that from a governance perspective. And I'd love to see him take up this idea about putting a price on carbon. I've got a bill. It's called the Energy Price Act. Go check it out. It's specifically to give them the obligation to do what they already have the authority to do. And I'd love to see them take that up, because with just a rulemaking or two, they could really totally transform the way that capital is allocated in the power sector and just unleash a ton of positive change. Because here's the beautiful thing: once you build a clean power plant, you permanently shut down the dirty stuff, because the dirty stuff can't compete with it. All you got to do is get it built. So making these little tweaks and rules that change the incentives, get the clean stuff built. That's how you really take off and accelerate this transition to a cleaner, cheaper economy. We know how to get there. We know what the engine is. We just got to get in the car and start driving.
Wow, the electric car, I guess.
Yes.
Congressmember Casten, I want to thank you. I know your time was tight. I appreciate you spending it with us, sharing your expertise, putting up with my naivete about the issue, but hopefully we've expanded what you are saying and doing, and the difference that I think you are making where you are. Don't undersell that. As a fellow fan of your artwork, Starry Night. We gaze to the stars, and I also thank your staff for being as incredibly helpful as they have been. Don't keep them all.
Well, you're too kind, and you're too kind, and you're far too modest. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. I love doing this because I feel like I get to learn along the way and have way more interesting bar conversations when I go out. But I do want to remind everyone that if you've missed any of this, the recording of tonight's Skeptical Inquirer Presents will be available tomorrow at skepticalinquirer.org. And as always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, to you, the audience, and my very special thanks and gratitude to our producer, Mark Kreidler. This is his last Skeptical Inquirer Presents. He's been our producer from day one, and it's been great working with him. I and everyone here wish him all the very best. My name is Leanne Lord. Thank you. Good night. Thanks again, Congressman.
Thank you, Leanne. Really appreciate it.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.